Glenn, in brief, what motivated you to write the book?
The book most immediately is the product of some lectures that I gave at Stanford in 2007, the Tanner Lectures in Human Values at Stanford. I was invited and thought I would talk about some topic dealing with inequality where there was a racial element, because that's what I've been writing about so many years. And as I thought about it, it seemed to me that this was entirely appropriate as a focus for those lectures. So I immersed myself in the literature. I gave some thought to the question. This was 2007,
right?
And I delivered these lectures. There was colloquy, responses from people, and so on. And out of that, this small book emerged. So that's sort of the process that I came to writing the book.
And say, if you can, in a kind of overview way, the thesis of the book.
I'm saying that we have in the United States in the last 40 years or so stumbled into a system of management of the problematic behaviors of some of the people at the bottom of our society, which is punitive. Okay? So the first point is simply to observe descriptively that we have a new order in terms of how we're dealing with problematic citizens, the scale and the character of it qualitatively and quantitatively unmatched by anything in our history.
Increased punitiveness.
Increased punitiveness and beginning when, you say? Oh, 1970 is not a bad place to start. And the scale is really quite substantial in the sense that 120 per 100,000 in the population being the rate of incarceration was pretty much the norm in the United States throughout the middle and into the last third of the 20th century. But then the curve just kind of takes off and we just go up, and we're doubling in every 10 years or so for a while. It's kind of plateaued now, but so there's the scale. Okay? Then there is also the fact that the incidence of incarceration is very unequal. Mass incarceration is really a misnomer. Hyper-incarceration might be a better descriptor, because the poorly educated, the socially marginal, the urban minority, and male are the element of our population who are subject to incarceration. I wanted to suggest, without in any way contravening the principle that people must be held responsible for what they do, I wanted to suggest that the system that we've, as I say, stumbled or wandered into, this is not a conspiracy theory in my mind, they're not a bunch of racists back there pulling levers, rather by accretion, by step by step, that the system we've wandered into really isn't entirely consistent with our own values, with how we understand ourselves as a society. I wanted to try to make that case that, as I put it at one point in the book, 1 million individual cases, each one rightly decided, can still sum up to something that is not at all right. Okay?
I think you said 1 million cases rightly decided can still equal an historic wrong.
Yeah, that is what I said. That is what I said.
Let's pause on that a moment. I was going to bring this up later. Let's pause on this very arresting thought for a moment, because at one point in the book you say that we should reject, I'm going to get this exactly right here, reject a pure ethics of personal responsibility when it comes to distributing justice. You say we must recognize a kind of social responsibility even for wrongful acts freely chosen by individual persons. And then you say the sum of 1 million criminal cases, each one rightly decided on its merits to be individually fair, may nonetheless constitute a great historic wrong. Could you say anything else you want to say about that point?
Well, let me just take up this question of responsibility, because I would expect pushback on this, okay? I Let me say what I'm not saying.
Okay.
Okay? I'm not saying that this guy takes a pistol, he goes into the 7-Eleven, he shoots the clerk behind the desk in the chest and walks out with the cash register's money, and it's somebody else's fault. It's the mayor's fault, it's the Congress's fault, it's the society's fault. I'm not saying that, okay? But what I am saying is that if you have districts in the middle of your great cities filled with people who are really hard-pressed, you've got ghettos, you've got public housing projects, you've got no-go zones, you've got places where drug-selling gangs are roaming freely. You've got public schools that don't work, okay? You've got a metropolitan fiscal politics which starves the core city for the resources that it needs to provide the services to people, right? In other words, you've got social problems, social failure, okay?
Constructed socially, not merely by those individuals.
Yeah, not necessarily consciously constructed, but nevertheless, the outcome of forces that are collective in their nature. The failure here is a failure of collective action to the extent that our civilization is encumbered by districts or elements or portions who are underdeveloped. People who are not adequately socialized, families which are not functioning, a failure for human capital to be acquired, this kind of thing, okay? Now these people are here, they're with us, and they're a problem. To the extent that we have structures which are abetting the production and the reproduction of population elements of this sort, this is not their fault or their problem, this is our problem. Okay, we're not educating our kids. That's our problem. If we've arranged space in our cities so that those of us who are prosperous can build a wall or an interstate between us and the problems and get away from them and protect our tax dollars from having to be siphoned off to deal with their problems, if that's the character of our politics, well, that's not their fault, that's our fault. All right, so now we have people and we have problematic behaviors. They must be dealt with, okay? This is not, I'm not a Pollyanna, I'm not, I don't want to disband civil order, whatever like this. These structures, these institutions of law are necessary for the maintenance of our civilization. Nevertheless, the failure that we're looking in the face of when we open up the jailhouse door and we see the hordes who are there, that's a collective failure. And to understand it only through the lens of individual responsibility. Each one of these bad actors must be dealt with. Lock them up and throw away the key. We need more police on the street. We well may. We need to put them in jail for a long period of time. Perhaps, although I'm less persuaded of that. But in any case, to see it only in that light, to see it as those people we have to deal with, get something between me and them, well, I think that's not really consistent with our highest ideals as a society, as a civilization, the American civilization I speak of. And so that's the great and the historic wrong. We have produced, we have collaborated in the production of social structures that have as one of their consequences the failure of human beings to be fully developed and the abetting of a whole lot of the stuff that we find problematic. But we then perceive it, filter it, react to it through a single lens, that lens of personal responsibility. Bad people must be dealt with. And we never do the reflexive thing. We never ask ourselves about, well, how is it that we managed to get to this pass?
Why do we have this?
Why do we have it? Why do we maintain it? How did it come about? What might we do about it? Okay.
Do we care that it exists?
Maybe if the wall is high enough and the forces that protect us are effective enough, we wouldn't care whether it exists, and that would be to our discredit.
Can I? All right, but you really don't have to get that deep. Why is it that many countries have the same, not enough education, not enough food to eat, not enough this and that, but don't deal with the least of these when they commit crime by locking them up? I was shocked when I read your book. I think the U.S. locks up more people than any other country on earth. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's
so,
right.
That's the problem. Everyone should, look at themselves and try to figure out the school problem and the food problem and the this problem. But do we have to deal with everybody? And I asked this when I was a jurist, does everyone have to go to jail? Does everyone need to be a felon? Do we have to put everyone on the chain gang? I'll never forget the first day I walked on the bench And I mean, it's black men, it's urban minorities or what, it's black men lined up in chains walking down the hall to be sentenced to incarceration by me and other judges. And why do we do that? Why aren't there other? I mean, I think it's a lot simpler, maybe. I mean, it's good to do all that inner looking at that sociologists do, but why do we deal with everything by locking everybody up and throwing the key away? What is it about the United States that causes us to react like that?
Well, okay.
David, you know the answer.
In the book here, you say, despite a sharp national decline in crime, since 1992, the crime rate peaked, it's been declining ever since. Despite a sharp national decline in crime, American criminal justice has become crueler and less caring than it has been at any other time in our modern history. Why? Why?
Okay, it's a big question, and I don't necessarily
The next thing you say is there's no simple answer.
Right.
Being a careful academic. But you know what the next word is? But. But what?
Well, our sentences are longer perhaps than they need to be, okay? I mean, does everybody have to go to jail? So that's a question we economists would say about the extensive margin, who goes and who doesn't. Then there's how long they stay when they go.
Right.
That's a question about we economists, not sociologists, would say is the intensive margin, okay? How intense? Okay, so 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 100 years, okay? 25 to life for 3 felonies, okay? There is a question of, okay, you go, you get out, what sends you back? Because a big chunk of the flow into incarceration in any given year are people who are being returned to prison for violating the terms of their release. They've been released conditionally, they failed a drug test or whatever it might be, and they're being sent back. There is also the question of law. And, you know, I'm not a lawyer, but I'll just say, it's not etched on stone up there somewhere. We decide what the rules are, that the breaking of which will result in your incarceration.
I want to press you as to why this is happening.
Okay, well, okay. I was identifying different elements that were feeding into it, but you want to know what the forces or the motives are that are behind that. And as I say, there's no easy answer.
Well, it's a powerfully argued portion of your book.
But one thing that yes.
Are you saying race is not an issue?
No, no. Race is always an issue. But what I've learned is you can be more effective if you don't dwell on it, if you have something else to say. Because once we make that the issue,
right,
you know, it becomes a kind of conversation stopper. No, I'm not saying that race is not the issue, quite the contrary. But here's what I want to say. I want to say that the politics of law and order, okay, the significance of someone who seeks public office persuading the electorate that they are not soft but tough on crime is one part of the process that has brought us here, because starting with state legislators, okay, but going all the way up to the federal government, you know, prison crime and policing never used to be an issue in federal politics and elections for senator or for president, but they have become post-1970 issues in presidential politics.
Even
and
68, Nixon
politics.
ran on law and order.
Indeed.
Right.
I don't want to come off too archly partisan by saying it's just something that Republicans do, because it's not, right? Bill Clinton in 1992 returns from the campaign trail to preside over the execution of Ricky Ray Rector,
yeah,
because he can't stand to have the taint on his brand of not being a guy tough enough to pull the switch on a murderer, okay? So one thing is the kind of politics of law and order, which kind of is a ratchet that just goes tougher and tougher, where no one wants to be seen as being on the low side of the comparison of who's tough enough with the criminals. Another thing, I think, there's a legal historian who just died, a Harvard professor named William Stuntz, who his book will be coming out posthumously, but in a series of articles in the Harvard Law Review makes this case about how punishment used to be much more lenient in the early decades of the 20th century. So he's looking 1920, 1930, 1940. he's looking at working class and, you know, low income and tough places in urban America. There's an ethnic population, and there are African Americans, and there are European immigrant populations. And his point is that back in the day, it used to be that the institutions of policing, of judging, and sentencing were much more representative of the parts of the society from which the offenders were coming, and therefore much more capable of parsing this really difficult conflict, which is between mercy and retribution. Okay? On the one hand, here's a kid that did something he needs to be dealt with, okay, whatever the thing might be. On the other hand, that's somebody's son, that's somebody's brother, that's somebody's cousin, you know? Therefore, for the grace of God go I. In the neighborhood that I grew up in, kids were walking with one foot on either side of the law. So went this narrative, right? And so the Irish police officer or the Italian or the Jewish prosecutor or whatever, back in the day, back in the ethnic day, would be dealing with these cases and would deal more lenient. So Stuntz makes this argument empirically. He looks for evidence of the extent to which people in situations where, you know, you get very high conviction rates today were being acquitted, and he finds that they were being acquitted at much higher rates, and he interprets this as the application of a kind of structured leniency or mitigation to the impact of the law over and against the people. Whereas, it took me a long time to say this, but whereas today, to a first approximation, what you have is a core central city where there are problems and where they're being dealt with by police and people are flowing into the jails.
Who aren't from there.
But no, yeah, the police are not there, okay? The election of the judges is taking place on a county-wide basis rather than on a city-wide basis where the median voter is in the suburbs.
So Justice Leah Sears is an exception to the rule of what you're talking about.
Well, she was a statewide officer as opposed to a municipal or local judge, but yes, where the cost of incarceration, so the local officials are making the decisions that produce the flow of inmates into the jails, but the state is paying the bill. Okay, so you got a real first order agency problem here, right? That is what I mean by, that's another economic link, but what I mean is the people who have their handle on the lever that's affecting the flow are not paying all the costs of moving that lever one way or the other, okay? So, I mean, there are a number of different things. There aren't jury trials anymore. They're all plea bargained by prosecutors who basically are negotiating with someone who's been apprehended by the police with a menu of potential costs that they can impose on them that has been drawn up by somebody who's sitting in the state capitol somewhere, who has created the statutes that the prosecutor can then apply to this or that. And so he negotiates whatever the outcome, things like this. We also have a war on drugs. That's another point. Now, maybe you would want to get to it. But in other words, we've got a kind of cultural politics of, well, what do you want to call it? I mean, hypocrisy or whatever, you know, in which we are, in the interest of protecting ourselves from drug use and drug trafficking, you know, elaborating fairly draconian, that's a big, fairly draconian penalties for people who are caught up in this trade. And those penalties do not mitigate the extent of the trade at all, quite the contrary, but they do have the effect of catching people for whom the best, you know, employment opportunity from their lights is standing on the corner selling drugs, catching them up in this revolving door.
Let me ask. Like let me quickly pose an alternative theory that you deal with in the book, and ask you both what you think of it. And I'm going to hold up this little chart. Sorry for the homemade quality of it. As you said, Glenn, in 1970, the incarceration rate was about 110 Americans per 100,000 persons. That had stayed steady since the 20s. By 1990, it had it had gone to 197, and by 2008, it had jumped to 504. Historically unprecedented. Another interesting fact is that around 1992, crime rates peaked. So they're getting higher and higher. And then after 1992, they get lower and lower. So we're steadily locking up more and more Americans, the chances of a white person being locked up are 3 out of 200. The chances of a black person being locked up are 1 out of 9. Is that for males or everybody?
That's males.
Males. 3 out of 200
Young males.
if you're a young white male, 1 out of 9 if you are a black male. The chances of you, if you're a young black male who did not graduate from high school, the chances of you being in prison at least some period of time before your 40th birthday is 60%. It's more likely, according to Glenn's reports, it's more likely if you're a black male living in the state of California, it's more likely that you will go to a state prison than it is that you will go to a state college or university. So the trend is more and more people incarcerated, disproportionately African American, crime rates going way, way up, then crime rates dropping. One theory, which you acknowledge in the book, is that all this makes perfect sense. You have an explosion in crime. People get worried about crime. What are we going to do? All this crime. Let's build more prisons. Let's lock people up. Let's keep the bad people behind bars. Let's become more punitive. We do it. Then crime starts going down. The more punitive we become, the more people get locked up, the more crime goes down.
So the idea is it's working.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy lurking in that. That is to say, you can't infer from the pure timing of it. You know, we put more people in prison during the 70s and 80s, crime started falling in the 90s, that the latter was caused by the former.
Right.
That would be just a fallacious statistical inference. It might be true, it might not be true. You would need more than just the timing to pin that down.
Right.
When people, Al Bloomstein is one whom I think of, Alfred Bloomstein is a criminologist at Carnegie Mellon of some distinction, look carefully at the micro data where they try to look across states at variation in the extent of penalty and correlate that with the behavior of individuals. They don't find much of incentive, much of a kind of deterrent effect in explaining the fall in crime since 1990.
Do you accept, was that the figure that you used of up to 25% might be explained?
Yeah, that was, I was taking that from the literature. Bruce Western, a sociologist at Harvard and colleague of mine on this American Academy project, comes to that conclusion that about a quarter of the decline in crime since 1990 can be accounted for by increased punitiveness of the law. Stephen Levitt, let me just say this, because Western is a liberal, Levitt is a conservative at the University of Chicago, an economist, and he pretty much comes to the same conclusion in his article in the Journal of Economic Perspectives. That it's about a quarter of the reduction. So it's not like punishment has no effect in keeping people from offending, but the scale and character of American upswing in punishment doesn't is way more than what is necessary.
So on a cost-benefit analysis, where every human life is weighed the same, it doesn't make sense. It's not a yours. Is that what you're arguing?
Well, I don't think it's passes a cost-benefit rationality test, but that's because I want to give some weight to the well-being even of people who offend, as well as to those who are connected to them by bonds of social and psychic affiliation.
Even if they're black?
Yeah, even if they're black.
Because Glenn, in the book, well, in your book, I think you hit that point. I mean, I was very moved by the book on many different levels. And I thought I thought it was a combination of precision and passion that I rarely encounter in writing.
Thank
and
you
I thought that the most powerful elements of the book for me were your ethical discussion of, you know, if it's poorly educated young black males who are principally in that line Leah was talking about, then I read your book to say, and you say it carefully, you're a very civil guy and you don't call people racists and so on. I read the book to say that in this land of ours, which was conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all of us are created equal, we are prepared to lock up huge numbers of young, poorly educated black men and not give it that much of a second thought because of some reasons you lay out, none of which are very noble.
I took it like that. As a matter of fact, I love the book so much that I wanted to send it to the folks in our state where I am from, Georgia, and not because of any noble reasons, but because our state has a financial problem right now, like many states do. So we're putting together a commission to try to get some people out of the correction system, not because of race, but because it's just costs so much. My concern was that the book had talked in terms of race more than the politicians in my particular state would be moved by. If you talk about just money, it can move people.
But his analysis of the
had a racist tone that our country.
And you
I was very moved by it, yes.
Yeah.
There was much I did not know. And I've been a jurist for 26 years. You know, I did not know that we incarcerated more people than like Saudi Arabia or the statistics, 60% of all black men. It was, I knew it was bad.
I didn't hear that. I've not known that
Yeah,
statistic.
I knew it was bad, but I didn't know it was
It's
bad.
race and class, okay?
But
Poorly
that's-
educated white men are also subject, not as to the same extent. And amongst blacks, the high school dropouts have a vastly higher rate of incarceration than those who have some college education. It's race and class. And I want to say a couple of things. Yes, yes, yes. I am saying if they counted, we wouldn't look the other way. We'd be asking ourselves some hard questions about the structures that we built, okay? If those were people that we cared about, we wouldn't take it with equanimity. We'd have trouble sleeping at night. We'd be deeply disturbed by it. It would be a crisis in our political culture. Okay? When the NYPD executed Operation Ivy League and led some fraternity members on 113th Street up in Columbia, where I'm teaching this year, out in handcuffs for drug dealing, you should have seen the faces on my students in the classroom because they knew those people. Those weren't abstract, evil doers or something who were just reaping what they've sown. That was Jim, John, and Harry. We know them. You know, we've been, maybe smoking grass with them or whatever it was, okay? They broke the law. They were dealt with. They are responsible for what they did, okay? On the other hand, you could make that bust on any college campus in the country. The bust of a group of fraternity guys who got somebody who's selling them a little cocaine, a little ecstasy, a little marijuana, and then they're distributing it to their friends around the campus. That's a bust that you can make just about anywhere, okay? Well, that kind of bust doesn't happen very often in the Ivy League. That's why it was in the newspaper. But it happens every day in dozens or hundreds of communities, and we've actually made an industry out of it. I mean, we've incentivized law enforcement authorities. We have, mandatory minimums for people who are caught up in this stuff. And the thing that I want to say is, it's a little bit like, this is just a metaphor or an analogy. It's a little bit like blaming poor, desperate women who are walking the streets selling their bodies in the sex industry for pulling down our morals. You know what I mean? Yes, they are. the women who are streetwalkers doing what they're doing, and it's not something that we could credit. On the other hand, there's no demand for their services without guys in BMWs with $100 bills flagging out the window, okay? So to freight the entire burden on the backs of these bad people and these wrongdoers for something that really is a reflection of the moral impoverishment of our own culture, okay, just strikes me as being a little short-sighted. And I think that if the people paying that price were people we knew, we'd have a different reaction to it. They are not. They are easily stigmatized, they are easily demonized, they're easily forgotten.
I want to ask you about black victims of crime. I do not recall a discussion of it in this book, and I want to remind you, or I want to say something that you wrote in 1994.
Oh, Lord.
No, this is not a setup. It's not.
No, that was a different guy, man.
It's not. Yeah, this is a different guy. It's a different Glenn Lowry. Okay, this is a review of John DiIulio's book. John DiIulio, who coined the term super predator.
Yeah.
And I want to be really completely fair to Glenn, and to really, this is not a setup question. This review critiques DiIulio. This is a criticism. If you read the whole review, which I recommend every essay in this very, very interesting book. He is critiquing DiIulio. I want to be really clear about that. 1994. But here's what I want to say, and I just want to ask this. Here's a sentence. I pulled it out, but it's the whole sentence. Keeping known bad guys in prison for a longer period of time would repay society far more than it would cost, with the poorest among us benefiting the most. Here's another sentence on the same page. It requires a genuine act of will to see that building prisons also means fewer rapes, robberies, and killings of innocent black men, women, and children. So I want to ask you,
yes,
is this act of will that you describe in 1994, does it have less of a place in your analysis today than it did then?
Completely fair question. I would say that it's a question of, I'd say two things. It's a question of scale, and argument is always relative to counter-argument. Okay, so let me just expand on those two things. I was saying, for basically the people who would dismiss, that was all preparatory to criticizing DiIulio, as you said, but I wanted to establish the fact that I didn't disagree with him about everything. Okay?
Yes.
I was saying, relative to people who would have dismissed DiIulio out of hand, it's completely legitimate to be concerned about the impact of crime on poor people, and to think that one way of dealing with it is to take dangerous people out of that population. I wanted to say that before I went on to the criticism, so that's kind of the relative part. Okay? But that was 1994. Where's your chart? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay, that was 1994.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got a different order of magnitude of stuff that
Yeah.
we're talking about.
Yeah.
But, and then just to close this, that's precisely the dilemma. The dilemma is that on the one hand, a community will be destroyed by a relatively few people if lawlessness is allowed to prevail. On the other hand, the expansive scope of policing and imprisonment, which is catching in its net such a huge number of these people. I mean, 60% of black young male high school dropouts having a year in a federal in a state penitentiary before the age of 40. I mean, that's really something that we want to stop and think about, because the prison walls are porous. Okay, this is an organic thing. These people don't stay in prison; they circulate. The average time they stay in there is about 2.5 or 3 years. They come back to the community. You got communities where the boys are growing to be men, mainly under the tutelage of men who have had to survive inside of institutions that are of a particular character. Okay, these are very tough places. you don't get along in there unless you defend your prerogatives and are prepared to use violence and so forth and so on, and you carry yourself in a certain way. And they come back onto the streets of these inner city communities, in and out, in and out, in and out. So we're just talking about that's the normative climate of the community now being shaped by the imperatives of survival inside of a total institution.
You quote some studies showing the kind of circle or feedback loop that goes more incarceration, back into the same community. I can't say it out, but you have a term for this, and the scholars do, where because this is all concentrated spatially, you have this back and forth loop where the spiral is always down.
Well, and they're not forming families. You make the point.
Yeah.
These men cannot form families. They can no longer vote.
By the way,
jurisdictions.
I wanted to ask both of you this question. Many states have laws that say ex-offenders cannot vote. What is your view of those policies?
No, I think at a certain point, ex-offenders should be able to vote. They should be able to get their right back at a certain point.
I've got a deep problem with it, man. I mean, you've got states. Well, I think there may be one or two states. I think Maine may be one of them, where even incarcerated people are permitted to vote. Okay, and certainly in some of the countries in Northern Europe, incarcerated people are permitted to vote.
In other countries, incarcerated people can vote.
But let's just put that aside.
So they set up polling booths in the prisons?
I'm not sure exactly how they do it, but booths probably not. Paper ballot under the door. I'm not sure about the mechanics.
Okay.
But the point I want to make is about citizenship. Okay? It's about citizenship. All right? Now, a person has done a crime, they're punished for the crime. Okay? But to take away their membership in the political community is a radical thing to do.
Yeah.
And
forever.
To what end? Okay?
Yeah.
To what end? Is it merely just a symbolic demonstration of our contempt for the person? Well, why should we be so contemptuous of our fellow citizens? Because let he who is without sin cast the first stone. I'm sorry, but I'm a Christian, okay? You don't just excommunicate people civically because they do misdeeds, in my humble opinion. The wholesale implementation of that kind of policy is un-American. It's not consistent, I am arguing, with who we should understand ourselves to be as a people. Like I say, they're not going away. They're going home.
Yeah.
Okay? So you're going to end up with entire communities full of people who have no franchise. Okay?
They said that in your book...
Is that what you want?
You said that in some states, between 25 and 33% of black adult males cannot vote because of this reason.
Yeah, it's complicated. The statistics are not going to catch it, but yes, numbers. No, those numbers are in the rough. There's a pair of political sociologists at Northwestern University called Manza, M-A-N-Z-A, and Uggins, U-G-G-E-N-S, and they have a book out from a credible academic press which does the following exercise. It estimates outcomes in Senate elections in a variety of states around the country on the hypothetical assumption that former felons would have been permitted to vote in those elections, allowing for the fact that participation would not be 100%, and for some people going to vote Democratic and some people are going to vote Republican. So guess who's not in the United States Senate, according to their estimates, if people could vote? Well, Mitch McConnell is not in the U.S. Senate, God love it. Nothing against Mitch McConnell. Okay, but I'm just saying, the very character of our politics is shaped by this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
George W. Bush, it's not close in Florida in 1992. It's not close.
If
in 2000. In 2000, it's not close. If ex-offenders are voting in Florida, that election is not close in 2000. Albert Gore is president of the United States. Again, not to cast any aspersions on the candidates who did not create the system, but I'm just saying the character of our politics is shaped by whom we allow into the polity, and to the extent that we civically excommunicate ex-offenders, we change the nature of our democracy. And you all know here in New York, because there's a big issue about the reapportionment implications of the large number of convicts shipped from the greater New York area to the more Republican and more sparsely populated upstate areas of the state, where heretofore when you've had the decennial census reapportionment. Populations are counted in the district such that inmates are regarded as residents of the places where they're being incarcerated. So that, oh, this is a fact, so that representation in the state assembly here in New York and in the federal offices upstate is partly abetted by the large number of black and brown men who are being shipped on buses up there to serve their time in prison, who do not vote and cannot vote.
Right.
Okay? I mean, that's just the kind of constituent a politician wants, right? They count for the distribution of federal funding and the number of seats, but they don't go to the ballot.
Well,
anyway, I'm saying, what I'm saying here is, I'm not saying that there's not an argument on the other side of these questions. I'm saying we need to think very carefully about what we do, because this is about our democracy, not just about bad people being dealt with.
Yeah.
And I think we may not want to do it quite the way we're doing.
I think that was the most important part of the book for me when you talked about this is about, at several points you say, who do we want to be as a people? What kind of people are we? You know, what, and I was very moved by this. This is going to sound maybe out of left field, but I just want to say I think. So you brought up this Christian business, and all three of us come out of the church in one way or another. And so today, in preparing for this, I tried to do a quick run through of what the Bible had to say about prisons. And of course, it's dangerous to do this because the Bible says a lot of things about justice and charity, and it's longer than just a quick Google search. But I do want to say that if you just look at prisons, the Bible views prisons as dark institutions and as instruments of oppression. That's almost universal. So I just want I'm just going to ask you if you have anything to say about this. Here's from Isaiah. These are completely representative. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord hath anointed me to preach good tidings unto the meek. He hath sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to them that are bound. And then in Job is wishing for a place that will give him relief, and he says, there the wicked cease from troubling, and there the weary will be at rest. There the prisoners rest together. They hear not the voice of the oppressor. So, I don't know what exactly to make of that, but I wondered if you have any. Did you think about that? Does that resonate with you in some way?
It does.
The biblical.
It does. I mean, I served for a number of years on Charles Colson's board at Prison Fellowship Ministries, which is a Christian ministry to men and women who are incarcerated. And Charles Colson, but I thought I was very gratified with the experience, and I thought the work extremely important. This is really just about, this is charity, if you like. Okay, this is not a political argument about prisons as such being oppressive, as much as it is saying that, given the necessity of having prisons in our midst, let us not forget that the people in there are also created in the image of God. Okay? Let us not forget that none of us is without sin. Okay? Let us not forget that our Lord, as he was being crucified, next to someone who was a criminal, also being crucified,
3 prisoners,
was able to abet their etc. So lock them up and throw away the key is just not where we want to be. Okay, I mean, let's get out of the theological argument and talk about it in secular and civic terms, right? But nevertheless, our political culture and our self-understanding is informed by the values that are influenced by our religious traditions. Locking them up and throwing away the key, those are still human beings inside of those places. And I also want to stress, they don't stay there. And they're connected to other human beings, many of whom have done nothing wrong. I'm talking about their children, their families, the neighborhoods from which they come from, and so on. So that, it behooves us to think beyond the fist It can't just be the fist. We can't just deal with this problem punitively. This is the argument that I'm trying to
On a
make.
pure ethic of personal responsibility, because 1 million cases rightly decided can add up to a social wrong. I take that to be the core thesis of your book. Do you want to
Yes.
say something?
Yeah, I take it not just as a core personal responsibility, but as a moral issue, that this country can't lock everybody up, or such big classes of people, particularly when it, to me, looks somewhat, I hate to use the term suspicious, but it does look suspicious when it seems to be one group, and not just class, not just low class. It does seem to be centered on black males. I am concerned about that. And as I was saying, I'm hopeful that with the economic problems that we're having, that we'll be able to find politicians who tend not to be moved by the moral conversation so much, will be moved by the economic one, the business case.
Leah,
which is
why, in your opinion, or maybe you don't agree with this, but I'm asking, it seems to me that this is a topic that has not risen to the level of having a national discussion about it of any real kind.
I agree.
You know, I mean,
To lock them up and throw away the key is the way.
you know, there's some academics who put out an issue of Daedalus, and that's very good, and you know, so it's not like no one's talking about it, but in terms of, you know, I want to be president of the United States, and I have a point of view about mass incarceration that I'd like to put in my stump speech.
Could you imagine somebody putting that in their stump speech and winning? That we have a moral obligation to, no, seriously though, putting that in to the American public, that we have a moral obligation to our fellow human beings. And, I mean, that's
or
true.
That this is failure, this is our failure. I mean, that's the way I look at it. This is a stain on our whole society.
I would agree.
Given our values of, we are supposed to be the land of the free, we are supposed to be the place of, you know, equal opportunity, and therefore the only way to perpetuate ourselves is to lock up this many people. You know, it seems shameful and something that you would want to really take a look at, but there's very little discussion of any kind about it. That it kind of is above the radar, you know?
Yeah, from a, as a jurist, I wasn't a typical politician, but having run statewide in Georgia 3 times, I had to sometimes understand the political process. And when and understand it very well. What I found and I did this with the whole family law issue, I would find an issue that mattered very much to me that I thought everybody should be concerned about, but you have to reshape it so that people aren't uncomfortable, so that it isn't what it really is, and so that you can feed it to people and that they'll be willing to eat it.
So in other words,
this is.
In other words, you would. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
No,
I was
that's
just going to ask if the economic argument that you were saying you believe is more
Much
broadly
more
acceptable.
Yes. I mean, for instance, I got the state of Georgia talking about the whole issue of family dysfunction when the study came out of how much family dysfunction was costing the state of Georgia. You know, you would do the same thing here. You know, if we didn't have to incarcerate 504, you know, inmates per 100,000 and would save this much money, and we could only do 110 and put the others in halfway houses and save all this, everyone would sit up and listen. These are tough times. But you can't talk race and you can't really talk class.
You're talking about Georgia or nationally or both?
Nationally.
Do you agree with
It's
that?
not just indigenous to the South.
That there's not a, 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 there that it's not a winning idea in terms of a political career to talk about this issue?
I think it's very tough. Now, Senator Webb, James Webb of Virginia, who's about to step down, he's not running for re-election, he's announced, did early in his tenure in the Senate take this issue up. And he even he's a member of the Joint Economic Committee of the U.S. Congress.
Yes.
And he held hearings at which I testified in 2007 or 2008 on this issue. There were a wide range of witnesses. Now, he did take the economic point of view. I think the hearings were called The Cost of Mass Incarceration.
Well, so there you go.
But he was bringing the issue to the fore and introduced legislation to create a commission which would review from the federal point of view, the structures that were leading to over-incarceration and make some recommendations. So that's just one thing. He took this on as an issue, and that's rather unusual. But the counterpoint here is an anecdote I heard during the 2008 campaign when a close friend of mine, a fellow called Mark Kleiman, who's a professor at UCLA of public policy, and whose book was just published recently by Princeton University Press, When Brute Force Fails is the title of the book. Mark believes that you can have half the people in prison and half the crime if you're smart about how you do it, and he has his suggestions. We could go into that, but my point is, when he went to someone in the Obama campaign, to someone high up in the structure of the Obama campaign, to say, hey man, I got a terrific policy idea, you guys ought to run with it. You can have half the number of prisoners and half the crime if you just do the following things. He wants to reform parole and probation, do it a whole different way and everything. Community supervision and all that kind of stuff. The campaign person says, I like that half the crime part. Okay? In other words, only a fool goes out there and tells people that we can have half the number of people in prison because it sounds like you're pro-criminal. Okay? Nobody wants to be, there are third rails, and this is one of them. Nobody wants to be pro-criminal. Be pro-police is fine. Being pro-criminal, and I'm not anti-police, I hope that's clear. But being pro-criminal, and I'm not that either, but you see what I'm saying? Being sympathetic to criminal, seeing the humanity of the criminal, talking about it in moralistic terms. This is dangerous. Talking about it in utilitarian terms, look, it's costing us $35,000, $40,000 per head, per year.
Right.
There's 150,000 in California, 175,000 in Texas, or whatever it is. These are roughly the numbers.
I don't know. It just leaves me
Multiply 150,000 by 40,000.
Yeah.
You got some scores of billions of dollars that you're talking about by the time you add that up over all the states.
David,
So-
you're the only one left. Because it sells.
Okay, but I got interested in this a few years ago when I read the studies that showed that if you take I know I'm like a broken record on this fatherhood issue, but if you look at the presence of a father in the young person's life, the racial disparities, really tend to, almost to evaporate. In other words, if you get young men growing up with a strong father in their life, that's going to be a significant protective influence for them against being incarcerated. So that if you have a society with fewer and fewer fathers living with their children, you're going to be tempted to just quarantine the consequences of that social trend. That is, yes, some of it stems from individual failure, and some of it, I believe, with you, stems from a society. It's a social. So, I tried with several candidates to get them to say that some version of that reduced to one sentence or two sentences and a stump speech. No way. Didn't want to do it.
Probably didn't test that well in the focus groups.
Let's shift to questions.